If you are an ARPG enjoyer, it is probably the best time right now for you. You have the most amount of options there has ever been, or it's the best time to get into it if you're somebody who hasn't been playing ARPGs typically. You know how they say you never know the golden years when you're in them? Well, I'm going to make the argument in this video that the ARPG genre just entered its golden years. Now, the first thing we need to do is set a definition of what I'm referring to. ARPGs could refer to everything from Elden Ring to Diablo, but I'm specifically talking about in this video, isometric, top-down, blasting through thousands of creatures, complicated build style of ARPG. That is the type of game I'm referencing in this video. And in this video, I have multiple examples of either games that are currently doing very well or games that are soon to come out that are looking quite good for the genre as well. So let's get into it. But before we do, let's talk about today's sponsor. If you're a fan of the Warcraft universe like I am, maybe you played Warcraft the RTS game, or maybe you play World of Warcraft, consider trying a cross-platform strategy action game called Warcraft Rumble. It is set in that Warcraft universe. You're gonna have characters you're familiar with, like Sylvanas. You can play against and eventually acquire characters like Ragnaros. And it's a strategy game that starts fairly simple, but gets more complex as you progress through it. It has PvE, PvP, I actually just recently got 90 sigils in the game, which is sort of like an achievement that now allows me to do raids and sieges. So it's something you can play for fun, not take too seriously, watch a movie in the background and enjoy characters you're familiar with, all the way to being hardcore about it and playing up the PvP leaderboard. So if you want to see more content before you consider downloading it, I actually do have another channel I've been uploading content related to Rumble on, so if you want to see what the game looks like, I'll put a link down below. You can check it out there. It's not an easy one. So thank you to Warcraft Rumble for sponsoring today's video. The first example, a game that has been out since October 23rd, 2013, has just recently hit its all-time high peak of players. I'm of course referring to Path of Exile. A game that is consistently being developed with more and more depth, so much so that the most common complaint is there is too much content in the game. Players are consistently coming back league and new season and year after year after year. Really does prove the line they once said that if you make it to maps, Path of Exile owns your soul. This is the best I've ever felt in a league start. I'm actually like absolutely loving this start. We're shredding everything. I feel like we're absolutely popping off, dude. I think 21 hours is a wrap for me, boys. I'm gonna go take a nap and I'll be back. Then there's a game that's sort of on the other side of a coin. A game that is, in my opinion, a gateway drug into ARPGs. I'm of course referring to Diablo 4, and I know this one from experience. You see, the only other experience I've had with ARPGs before Diablo 4 was a little bit of Lost Ark and a little bit of Diablo 3. I worked in a phone call center. I'd take calls and I'd just spin to win on Diablo 3 Barbarian, holding down the mouse, and it was super simple. So I hadn't really gotten into ARPGs very much. So when I got into Diablo 4, it was the first time that I had really focused on the ARPGs. It was the only game I was playing, and I got heavily into ARPGs. Now, in the months following Diablo 4's release, it had got a lot of bad press about not having enough in-game, also being, a slow, boring leveling process. But in its time, now by Season 5, the game has turned around to a point where people that are even Path of Exile longtime players are saying the game is in a good state. It seems like the community for people that are still playing Diablo 4 are actively really enjoying it. Season 4 and Season 5 have both had good reviews. It's the first time we've had 2 seasons in a row of people enjoying the season and actively going out and saying they're enjoying the season.
Having so much fun with this game right now. This is a huge difference.
The most enjoyable Diablo experience we've ever had.
No matter what class you played, you're going to have a better time this season.
So now with the balance getting better, the leveling process seeming to be enjoyable, now we're getting multiple seasons in a row that seem fairly decent. The next thing that's coming for Diablo 4 is going to be the expansion. If the expansion is knocked out of the park and it adds more additions in the game, adding more depth, on top of a base game that now has been solidified as fairly enjoyable, Diablo 4 has gone from being a game that literally spawned a meme of Diablo 4 bad to a very playable, enjoyable game with multiple seasons in a row seeming to be well received. That is still to be determined on October 8th when the expansion releases. So Diablo 4 actually fits a very important role within the ARPG genre. It is that break-in point, that gateway drug, that entry-level game for people that haven't really played ARPGs. ARPGs typically are a genre that comes with a high level of frustration, maybe not a high level of polish, and a high level of commitment needed in order to get the most out of the genre. For this reason, Diablo 4 actually fulfills a critical role and a much needed role within the ARPG genre of bringing in players from outside the genre that maybe would otherwise have never played ARPGs. And the fact that it has such a large brand franchise around it of Diablo is another name recognition that might tempt people into trying that genre.
Today we honor Shroud, who fought bravely and died just disgustingly.
It gives name brand recognition to maybe pull people into the genre that would otherwise never have tried it. It gives simplicity enough that it won't frustrate people that are not familiar with ARPGs. It doesn't require the insane amount of commitment that some of the other ARPGs require in order to get the most out of the game. And also has another critical component, which is couch co-op, cross-play, cross-progression, cross-system. This allows people that are console or PC players to interact or have a friend come over with a controller and play at the same time. This key component is something that other ARPGs are now starting to recognize is extremely important if you want to pull the most amount of people possible. This is where we start talking about Path of Exile 2. You see, Path of Exile 1 has console play on it, but it's not cross-play, cross-progression. You can't play on PC, go to your Xbox after you're done playing on your computer, sit on the couch and play your same character. In fact, the patches, etc., are all separate. This is something that Path of Exile 2 understands is a critical component now. And with Path of Exile 2, they are releasing not only cross-play, cross-progression, but also couch co-op. Now, I myself have actually played Path of Exile 2's couch co-op. I had a buddy fly all the way from Australia to LA when we did testing for Grinding Gear games. I have a full video breaking this down, which I will put at the end of the video in case you're interested in seeing this breakdown. But let me tell you this, the couch co-op in Path of Exile 2 is phenomenal, and in my opinion will pull in a much larger demographic of players. There's a lot of PC players, but there's also a significant amount of console players, and ARPGs are typically not games that go onto consoles. I think something that's understated typically in console games is the ability to play simultaneously with somebody, and that ability to do that without splitting the screen up. You see, Path of Exile 2 doesn't cut your screen up. It's one screen, and you also have tons of good quality of life, like we can both have our own inventories open. We don't have to wait for the other person to finish what they're doing on the menu. You can each have your own menus. This means when you're playing with somebody, it's not interrupting your gameplay. So Path of Exile 2's focus on couch co-op and console play, and also making sure at the same time that it's on the same server as a PC with cross-play, cross-progression, is going to bring in a large amount of players from outside their typical demographic. And all of that is before I mention the Path of Exile 2 is going to be free on console. This is a game that costs $0. Now, there are cosmetics you can buy. There are some quality of life like stash, inventory type of features, etc. you can get, but the game itself is going to be free. And with not very many good options on console for co-op couch play, and with a lot of people recently being introduced to this genre with Diablo 4 on console, I think Path of Exile 2's demographic is going to be significantly larger than Path of Exile 1's was.
Path of Exile's kind of got a reputation as a game of complexity, and this is something we want to make sure that we're improving while also maintaining all the depth that we have. So we're making sure in PoE 2 that we've got a lot more systems around giving you more information.
They realize the Path of Exile 1 is a game that can be difficult to get into and loses a lot of players in the beginning. So now they're adding things like an in-game wiki, basically. When you don't understand what a word does, you can click on it in-game, and even on the console, it's going to show you a full breakdown of what it actually means. They also now have videos in the game that showcase the skills before you acquire them, so you know what they actually do. They have simplified some things in the game that will make it easier. For instance, sockets are no longer colored, so you don't have to worry about red, green, blue. All the sockets are the same color now. So in that aspect, there is a little bit less complexity. And it does seem like they recognize that and have learned that lesson from the original Path of Exile. I've recently gone through the process of learning Path of Exile 1, and it was difficult to say the least. I haven't looked up anything. I don't know anything about the game. Jesus H. Christ. So I'm quitting the Path of Exile officially. This is too much. I like how this is the opposite of D4. So D4 doesn't have enough content and it makes me want to quit. PoE has too much content and it makes me want to quit. Can someone make something in the middle? The fact that I can say I'm 1,100 hours into Path of Exile 1 and I'm still considered new at the game is something they don't want to have happen again with Path of Exile 2. And with Path of Exile 2 sending out their closed beta invites, this is an NDA, basically a technical test is what it is to make sure they get the bugs out of it and make sure it's working with GPUs, etc. With those invites starting to go out, we're getting pretty close to Path of Exile 2 actually having a playable early access. Now there's another game that we need to talk about. There is an old school ARPG that has just recently released its gameplay footage for its new sequel that is coming out in 2024. Now we don't know much about this game yet. We did just get the gameplay footage. However, Gamescom is soon and we should be getting some more gameplay videos. Titan Quest 2 is obviously a sequel for the original Titan Quest that came out in 2006. That was a game that was then ported later on to mobile and was sort of one of the original ARPGs. This is a Diablo style hack and slash ARPG. It's not going to be sort of like No Rest for the Wicked where it's slow or more Souls-like. This is a very standard ARPG style of game. And if you're curious in Titan Quest and you want to look into another game that's coming out in the future, you can play the original on Steam. So how about couch co-op with Titan Quest 2? Well, this is as of 2023, August 12th. There was a developer that made a post on the Steam forums. They said it's their plan to offer a LAN mode, but that they're probably going to have to make LAN characters. So basically, it sounds like couch co-op might be available, but might not be available in online mode. Now, we'll probably get more information about that here sooner, but this is the closest thing I was able to find around couch co-op. However, on the Xbox store, it does say online co-op to the fore. Now, whether or not that means local co-op going online or only pairing with other players, don't know, but that's all we know so far about local co-op. Either way, we're gonna have another ARPG join the ranks here very shortly. And then of course we have to talk about Last Epoch. Last Epoch is a game that sort of has a consumer first mindset. Out of all the games mentioned today, Last Epoch is the only game that has a fully offline playable mode with all of the content in it. Unfortunately, it's not on console, but it is fully playable on Steam Deck. And while the game has hit its full release, it still has a lot of content that is needed within the game, but I think they bought themselves some time by having a fair price point and also putting out a roadmap that shows what they're planning to develop. So you don't just feel like the game is purchase, you're done, nothing's coming. They actually show you a long ways out what they're developing. And some of those developments have already hit. For instance, we had the second cycle come out recently that added the Harbingers as well as the Pinnacle boss to the game. So I think it's going to follow a similar process like Path of Exile 1, where every one of the different cycles, as they call them, is their version of seasons or leagues. They're going to add more and more and more content, which will build up that base level of players. And I'll admit, I want to see them do good because it's a smaller team. They seem to be very fair with the price. They do seem to have that consumer first mindset. I like the fact that they added the offline mode, and they generally just seem to be pretty good guys over there. As more people are coming into the genre through games like Diablo 4 and what will be Path of Exile 2, Last Epoch is that middle ground between somewhat simple to understand and easy to access and extremely complex and overwhelming. Last Epoch hits that middle ground very well. The skill trees are fairly intricate. There's a lot of builds you can actually do. There's some complexity behind it, but it's also simple enough to understand. So it's a nice middle ground for people that maybe don't like the easy to access ones or don't like the games that are way frustratingly, overwhelmingly complicated. So while I don't believe the Last Epoch is going to be the largest ARPG almost at any point, I think it's going to be hard for it to compete with names like Diablo and also, development practices like Path of Exile, that the amount of content they're able to produce is ridiculous in Path of Exile, for instance. I do think Last Epoch is going to garner a fairly significant population of consistent players that like that healthy middle ground and like what Last Epoch has to offer. So going into 2025, I think we're going to see Last Epoch go from a game that maybe doesn't have as big of a player base to a much wider player base by the end of 2025. So that's about it for this video. My argument that we are currently in the golden era of ARPGs or are just now entering it. Consider liking if you like the video, subscribing if you want to see more of me. And here's a couple other videos like the Path of Exile 2 couch co-op video I mentioned, or maybe Diablo 4 in its current state review.